Good afternoon. My name is Bahman Yazdanfar, and this is Voters Ago, a weekly program brought to you by my colleague John Hardy and I to discuss different elements of the social behavior of mankind, us in general, when it comes to the situation that we interact with each other, such as larger organization, institutions, or even within the family. Basically why we do what we do in general. So far we haven't got anywhere. We just discuss a lot of things, and probably we have to change the name of the show. We don't get anywhere, kind of thing. But
this could be this could be the groundbreaking show.
The groundbreaking
Today
show.
I feel we're really going to
Today,
make some, you know,
by the way, my colleague again departing to abroad. So this show
Parts unknown.
This show is not will not be available for quite some times. And
except for
who
bootleg
knows?
copies.
Maybe it is the last show. So pay attention very carefully. That
No,
we
there'll be
end up
more.
with.
Don't get the audience's hopes up.
Okay, we don't.
That's now you're crossing the line.
Yes, as in previous show I mentioned, usually between the two shows we get together and we start to eat each other's brain, so to speak, about different issues. And last time when we were talking about that, which was, I believe it was Friday night, for number
2 days ago.
3 days ago, but number of the issues for 3-4 hours. The fundamental issue that we were talking about was why mankind in general, from the time that it was the tribal environment, as soon as they become in the urban area, all of a sudden what's happened in the physiology or anatomy or genetics of the mankind, who started to become what we are today, and by that I mean to focusing on the things, possessions, and the money mainly over the actual basics of the life. In other words, why we love things and we use people to get things, so to speak. Your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking is because, let's say, in a simple situation where we're all thrust onto an island and we have to survive somehow, and we're directly exposed to nature. We can't survive on our own. We need each other.
Okay.
Right? Very simple.
But tribal system was that.
No, but exactly. But a very simple situation, right? So there is need. There's economic need. There's emotional need. There's survival. There's a complete alignment in that situation. And so, therefore, you don't need to have too many intervening rules to actually make things work, because things would naturally find their own way. But then when you start to add scale, and I think this is what we were talking about, it's not my idea. I remember this one fellow had this idea. It was in the town of Albi in the southwest of France, and he had a little pizzeria, and he was this little philosopher who owned the pizzeria. That was his cover. Okay. Another philosopher.
He's like a soup Nazi in Seinfeld.
Kind of. Actually, he was like that, because if he didn't like you, no pizza for you. And he was talking about scale. He said very simply, anything above, let's just say, a small scale, small town, problems started to happen. And it was like, that was his whole philosophy. That was it, short theory. But when you start to think
What do you mean by a smaller scale happening?
in other words, once you started to have a larger congregation of people together,
Things doesn't happen.
well, problems happen. Because now you start to have hierarchy. You start to have organization. And you start to have people who are removed from direct survival, right?
Okay.
Now, the thing is, once that is introduced, that's the beginning of the game.
Okay, that's the beginning of the game. But
Yep.
as we discussed on Friday, there was an issue. For instance, the hierarchy was in the tribe unwritten. So there was an elder, there was then their sons and daughters, and then
But
there is
what kind of hierarchy? Exactly, a different
it was
kind
a
of hierarchy.
respect. It was not written. Nobody came and said, "I am your boss," but everybody knew who they go to.
And also, it came out of experience,
Okay.
right? So the thing was that the elder became the elder. He survived just by surviving and not getting killed, right? I mean, he already was successful in that environment. And he had experience. He had a deep knowledge of the traditions,
Okay.
and so he was the expert in local life, right? So they
Okay.
turned to him, not just to him individually, but collectively, that group,
Okay.
right? So, very simply, they couldn't go off on their own. One elder couldn't go off on his own and come up with his own theory or dominate. But probably at one point, once you started to have maybe one charismatic individual, right? One character like a Genghis Khan or something, let's just say, smarter than the others, more aggressive, whatever reason, then what can start to happen very quickly is that this one tribe starts to, let's say, organize itself in a way that is slightly better than other tribes and starts to be able to take over the other tribes to win. It gains this competitive advantage.
Or the spoil of the war, or whatever.
Well, but no,
war-
but the point is that same competitive advantage now will play out continuously, right? All it takes is that 1% edge that they continuously have in each battle, and now they can basically start an
like a
empire.
domino effect, it goes all the way.
Exactly, and that's essentially what it
And
was with
so-
the Zulus. Were the same story.
So that competitive advantage that you're talking about, usually, again, even with the minimal reasoning ability, I'm talking about the 2,000, 4,000 years ago, where there was not technology, there was not dissemination of the information to that extent that we have here right now. There must be a motive. And you mentioned the other night that the motive is a theft.
Well, I think it's in a sense it's
Either
laziness.
is winning or gaining something for nothing or free.
Schopenhauer talks about this, that the basic, human trait is laziness, right? Getting the
Okay.
most for the least. So, if you take most people, most children, if they don't have to do something, they won't, right?
Okay.
So, now once you introduce the possibility for certain individuals to do less and get more, right? Then you're now also introducing this possibility for them to, again, take the path of least resistance internally and somehow legitimize it, right? Because every class that has an advantage has to legitimize
What
their
they do.
theft. Oh, absolutely, because they have to say, well, the reason why we're working so little and consuming so much is
Because we are the smarter.
because
Or
we're
we had
superior,
education, we had
because
this,
God loves us more,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
chosen, whatever it be. But they have to come up for a rationale, and invariably that rationale is nonsense, complete nonsense, because it's only compelling to the people within that tribe. To anybody else, they would see it transparently as nonsense. So in that sense, the tribe who is elevated becomes the stupidest of all. In their own narcissism, they become the least wise, and interestingly enough, spiritually the least evolved. So in an interesting way, from the spiritual perspective, the elevated class becomes the lowest class.
We can see it even in the political spectrum, like G7 or G8. They become more decadent than the other societies in general.
Of course, it becomes more. Then they now have to protect themselves with, fascist-like measures. And they have the riot police. And they have
And
this.
they have
and
graph
that.
to show it,
Oh,
to
yeah.
legitimize it.
Exactly. And then
Pie
they have,
charts.
They have pie charts. They have things. They have that. And in the end of the day, the joke is that it's just a bunch of smoke and mirrors to convince the people who are on the one side, the right side of the game, that they belong on the right side of the game, and the people on the wrong side of the game are not going to be convinced by it anyways, and then those who are on the right side of the game would say, well, you wouldn't agree with us anyways, right? So what happens is, and never the twain shall meet. And so you look at, it was interesting, there was a conversation between Zakaria and
Zakaria on CNN?
Yeah, on CNN, sort of the. In a way, the Uncle Tom version, right? In other words, the black who joins the whites in being, arguing their case, and defending the slave master against the other slaves in a sense, right? So in the same way, here he is indignantly talking to some imam who's a radical. And the imam is talking about the fact that, well, basically you're just a bunch of liars with all your freedom because look at Guantanamo Bay, etc., etc. And then Zakaria is saying, but look at all the fact that you've got droves of people who are trying to leave, and the caliphate and they're held there by force, etc. And the imam is saying, well, those are just pictures that you're showing. We have other pictures. And in the end, ultimately, nobody's going to be convinced by this argument. Who's ever in the West on that side is going to think Zakaria is making sense, and who's ever on the other side is going to think the other is making sense. And they won't get to the main point, which is, and it was interesting. They were also talking about this whole issue of radical Islam, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a total segue, but I thought to myself, this whole radical Islam, right? Where Obama's saying, well, we're not going to talk about radical Islam, and
They don't even mention
Islam is not
the
radical,
phrase,
etc.
yeah.
Right? And in a sense, what's missing in this conversation is a distinction between religion and politics, right?
Yeah.
Because the problem is that, to me, the problem with talking about radical Islam is that in the process of talking about radical Islam, invariably it leads to radicalizing Islam in the eyes who are non-Islamic. Because then you could come to the thing, well, then what's not radical Islam? Because we go to the Quran and look at this and look at that, and so clearly this whole thing is radical, which then, of course, comes to the conclusion.
Then the whole Islam is radical. Then what is the point of radical Islam?
Well, then the problem you also have is then you've got basically like over 1 billion people who essentially are ready to tie bombs to themselves and blow themselves up, right? Mm-hmm. Now, so again, it leads to something which just doesn't make any sense. So then you go the opposite way and you say, well, but the thing is, we shouldn't call them radicals, etc. And in a sense, he's right. We shouldn't call them radicals per se because of what it leads to. But the problem is that in the average person viewing cannot make the distinction between politics and religion. So for instance, let's just say, the Jewish religion, anti-Semitism, etc. It's a political, it's a cultural thing. It's not a religious thing. Most of the people who are anti-Semitic probably don't know anything about the real distinctions between Judaism and Christianity that are meaningful, right? But the thing is, it's all based on their experience with Jews or what they heard about Jews, etc. Same thing with all kinds of prejudices,
The same way that
right?
some people don't like Muslims. Some
Precisely.
People,
So really it becomes a cultural thing. It's about Arabs. It's not about the Muslim religion, this or that. It really becomes cultural, and then behind that it becomes economic as well. Mm-hmm. Right? So what they cleverly do is they mix it all together, right?
Which we discussed that a couple
Yeah.
of shows ago.
They
I said
turn
they
into a
dilute
soup.
everything. I was talking
They do,
about
and
that
so you can't
water and
separate
the dyes and all of that. Yeah.
But there's one thing, I had this inspiration. The other day I just had this dream.
Related to the Islam?
Yeah, well, no, it's related to all of this. It came from a conversation that I had with our fearless leader here, Chris, who we finally got his attention now. That he's actually our producer, who now all of a sudden he's regained his no, not my toy, but he's regained his interest in the show. Okay. So it's this. So in the dream,
you were dreaming.
Yes, okay. Exactly. I'm dreaming, and in the dream, this is what happens in the dream. Spaceship lands on Earth.
Okay.
Like your classical flying saucers, just like your cliche flying saucer. We see it from the outside landing. We see the doors opening. Now the perspective shifts to from inside the spaceship. If you were the alien, from the outside, we actually see the alien, who's there standing, ready to exit the ship. And now it shifts to the perspective of the alien, from his perspective, looking out. So he's looking out into the world. He goes out into the world. And what does he see? Well, first of all, now, once again, it pans out again into a perspective as we see the alien in society, right? So here he is, stranger in a strange land, walking about in this seemingly chaotic array of events, people doing this, doing that, in patterns which seem to have no pattern at all, seem to be complete chaos, correct?
Yeah.
So now we shift to the perspective from inside his helmet.
Are you still in your dream, or the dream is finished?
No, this is still the dream.
Okay.
Just try to stay with me here.
Okay. No,
I mean, this is calling for a stretch.
The mere
here.
fact that you could retain all of that.
Well, exactly, and it's going to be an even greater thing if you retain it afterwards. So, as we're in this dream, and as the alien is walking in the crowd, what he's now starting to experience the crowd as is a bunch of these figurines like you would have in, those clocks in cities?
Like a Big Ben or
like
something.
in Prague.
Yeah, okay.
And you have the characters
Yeah.
right? And so that the characters are moving
Oh,
about.
the one that comes out of the. Okay.
Exactly. And the characters are going about in circles. And so as they're milling about in these various circles, they just sort of look like a chaotic mess. And then what happens is the perspective shifts where the alien is a little bit elevated, about, a few degrees higher than the crowd. And what he starts to see is that these figures are actually revolving on wheels, right?
Okay.
They're connected to gears, so like these wheels. Okay, so we look at the individual wheel, and we see the individual on the wheel is pegged around the wheel. And so these being the troopers, right?
Okay.
They're just going around the wheel. And then we notice that each of the wheels is connected to kind of a sprocket, to an axis.
Okay.
Beneath this axis, there's something turning it, and it's a character turning the wheel,
Okay.
right? These being the players.
Okay.
Then we go again up to the level, up slightly higher. We start to see that these individual gears, like a big clockwork, are all connected together. One gear is turning another gear, turning another gear, right? And then when we go still farther, we actually see that this entire thing is the inner workings of a music box. And so there's a certain kind of musical pattern, basically a musical, score that is running this whole thing. So if we take a look at the perspective of the individual trooper, he's experiencing himself or herself as being in the world, making choices, doing what they want, as they want,
And contribute to the society.
As well, exactly. Whatever is the path of least resistance for them to make their life easier and to being in that life easier. And then the next one is when we go to the individual player, the player is experiencing himself as being king of his domain. He controls that wheel, or in his own mind he does. Mm-hmm. But when we go to the larger perspective, we realize that that wheel is being driven by something much larger, the larger clockwork, right?
Okay.
And so the larger clockwork is the game. Once it's set in motion, once it's wound by the great clock, basically like by whether it's God or whoever runs that game and turns it, the game just runs by itself.
So where is the outsider in that clock?
Well, you see, the outsider is the alien.
Oh, the alien who was landed
Exactly.
and opened
And
the
so
game.
so the alien essentially, and he's encountering this, has two ways of being in the world. Oh, yeah, but then the thing that I forgot is one of the things that what allows the alien to actually see this is a particular pair of glasses that he puts on. So that at first he's seeing this thing as just like a clockwork or just these various characters, but then when he puts on the
Like a
glasses,
laser beam.
with the glasses, it actually lifts him up and gives him this perspective. Now, so essentially what happens is for the outsider, they have two positions. One is, if they try to engage with this melee without having these glasses, ultimately they'll just get caught in the gears and get crushed by the game.
Okay.
But with the glasses, if they're able to understand the game and to learn how to dance through the game, they can essentially dance, moving from wheel to wheel, bouncing, moving, because each one has its own rhythm and they can actually align themselves with each rhythm as they learn how to align themselves with these games.
Okay.
Right? And so each one of the cultures then has their own music. So the Italians, the Irish,
It's
Scottish,
like
the
Toronto.
Iranians. Toronto essentially is more of a cacophony. It's more of a kind of like a jazz, jam session. It's not quite working. But all of these things have a rhythm. And so the idea being that you align yourself with these rhythms and you dance above it, not in it. And so ultimately what the outsider has to be able to do is engage with the world by quickly hopping from game to game to game, moving about quickly, deftly, adroitly. And that's really the point. And so that then becomes the metaphor.
And all of that was in your dream.
Imagine that.
Oh, imagine. And you remember all of that.
Well, now I do.
Oh.
With your help, of
Oh,
course.
It was it black and white color.
It's funny you asked that, but it was shifting.
Okay.
Black and colors and little splotches here and
I
there.
don't know what you eat before you sleep, but
Clearly, it's a change of diet's required here.
but having said that,
Thank you for that expert analysis. This is, I was hoping to actually, promote some
I
sort of
jumped-
debate, and the most I got was basically some
Okay.
dietary advice.
No, I understand that.
Most helpful.
I understand that elaborate analogy, but I did not understand the connection. Why did you have to put it in the form of dreams?
Just to make it digestible for you.
Okay. There was no need for that in this show. but listen, you just took me off the track of what we were talking about.
Which
Now,
was?
we were talking about, okay, this dream, and let's say this analogy that you brought up, and outsider are usually outsider. I mean, people that jump from one game to another, and it is the way they have to survive or do something, whether or not they succeed. That is different issue altogether.
No, but what is important though in that is that the outsider has to work with the game, right?
No, I
you cannot
understand
go
that,
against it.
you
He
know-
can hop, and also if they do, it's not about changing the game per se, but he can actually affect a different outcome.
No, I understand that. What I'm saying is trying to go back to the original discussion about the instinct of the mankind, that if they get the little bit more competitive advantage, they try to justify what they do, and usually players do this kind of thing. Either it is in political or in the corporate level.
okay, but I was-
But coming back, I'm just trying
Yeah.
to connect these two together in a sense to get to the point of the instinct, the intention. Even if you are outsider or not, if you can alter the game or not, if you manage to change the game or not, this continuum that has been around, let's say, for the last 3,000 or 4,000 years
Since
after
society began, yeah.
urbanization, is it something that is in our gene right now? It is in our psyche, or is
I would
is
say-
it something that can be? There is a remedy for that. What is it?
I would say what it is for me. I mean, how I interpret it is going back to that metaphor that whoever this clockmaker is, and I believe there is some sort of entity of some kind, which is,
Energy.
I don't know whatever
Whatever.
we want to call it, but let's
Okay.
just say a consciousness that is at a higher level than ours in terms of its sophistication,
Okay.
but one which is not the highest level. Like, in other words, not as high as the consciousness that created nature,
Okay.
but it's an intervening level. And I would say whatever this being was, at this intervening level that set this clockwork in motion, it basically has the intention of sucking energy. And so the point of the game is to lock consciousness within that game, right?
Okay.
Because once we engage in the game, just like a dance, right? Imagine, that there's a dance and it's a square dance, that twirling dances, right? Or like a dervish, right?
Or waltz.
From your country where they're always dervishing, right?
Yes, but the dervish is just one gender.
Well, whatever, but I mean, just exactly,
Go with the waltz. You're
Yeah,
much better.
okay, but with that said, let's say look at a waltz, right?
Yeah.
You throw everybody into a waltz. Once you're in that waltz, you're in the vibration of the waltz.
Yeah, you don't see the other people. You're just focusing on what you do.
That's one level of consciousness, but I mean, if you become better, you can see another. But even if you're seeing the other ones, you are still swept up in this swirl, right?
No, I
For
mean
you to do
other
so-
people who are not involved in the dance and standing outside.
yeah,
Yeah, you don't see those people
You're,
much.
well, or even if you're seeing them, your main awareness, your body, your senses are swept up in the dance, right?
Okay.
The emotion of the dance.
You're involved.
You're involved, exactly. And that's essentially what this game is. It moves, it's a swirl. It gets everybody involved. And it draws them in, this spin. The merry-go-round is a typical example. Ray Bradbury uses this, the merry-go-round, very much. In Something Evil This Way Comes or something like
It's
that.
like Greek dancing, doesn't it?
Exactly, but there is a point to the swirl, or the dervish. It's the swirl. And the idea then of that swirl is it creates a momentum. It creates a central force, and it draws you into it and draws others into it as well.
Like a centrifuge.
Exactly. And that's what it is. It's energetic. And it's like a vortex. And the thing is, in and of itself, probably it's not a problem. But I think because it's just, it's a way of creating energy, a way of generating energy. It's a technique. So let's say in the case of a waltz, it's very graceful and beautiful. But I think that the way it ultimately is used in the game is to lock us into a lower and lower and lower pitch, right? So an example of, let's just say, how this game is, let's say, played right now is Facebook, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got a bunch of people who are basically now plugged in all the time into, what other people are saying about other people and themselves, and
And then
and on and
engage
on and on and on,
automatically
right?
about it.
At the lowest level, right? And so the thing is, there's so much noise going on that they don't have time for anything else. Like when you think about it, how much time do people spend on social media, and how much
What do you get out of
well,
it?
let's say LinkedIn, for instance, is amazing. We were talking about this. Here it is supposedly for business purposes. And yet, of all the people I've ever spoken to on LinkedIn, I've almost met nobody who was sincere, who actually got any kind of real benefit out of LinkedIn. I mean, it's a bunch of, superficial relationships. Everybody is buying, everybody's selling, and nobody's buying, is typical thing on LinkedIn.
Actually, that's a good segue. It comes back to the, not segue actually, related to the subject matter in the sense that we discussed it on Friday. That everybody gets up in the morning. I mean, not everybody, but generally speaking, those who want to get up, they get up in the morning. They go out and they hustle their way out to the end of the day. And then they go and engage to the smallest sphere of their influence, whether it is the family or their friend. And then they start, some of them or many of them, they start to brag about how they did on that day, if they did good. And the way they are talking about that is like some sort of the triumph that I could sell something for more to someone else.
I took some.
I took something, and that is an okay thing, and it is in fact
It's a win.
Is a winning, or it is. And even if you look at the movies that were produced, they are glorifying the heist, they are glorifying the certain elaborate bank robbery or ruse or something to get something out of a millionaire or something like that.
It's like the,
that is in the gene, and people are even
not in the gene necessarily, but certainly in the conditioning.
conditioned, but even ordinary people who probably never have that kind of a chance in their life, they are going and enjoying and talking about that. Which
Well, look at the fairy tales. Fairy tales often include some sort of thing of theft, stealing from the king, stealing from the, capturing the princess from,
like Robin Hood or
right, exactly, stealing from the bad, giving to the good. There is an element of, sort of larceny, adventure, mischief, but ultimately with good and evil somehow reflected in it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's archetypal.
And if it is which brings us to the very unsettling confusion. Because if it is the battle between evil and good,
right,
and if those who claim that they are fighting evil, which is probably most of the people claim to,
most of people believe themselves to be on the side of the good, yeah.
And yet the same people go and come back and say, okay, I got something out of John Hardy today. Instead of selling that glass of water for $5, I sold him $50, and he was taken or something like that.
This is
so if I am, what is that? How
do they reconcile those two?
Internally, I mean, I can understand an organization or a corporation or a government try to justify what they do, or justify their own mischief. But I cannot understand how in an individual level they can reconcile this internal conflict.
Very easily. I mean, I think that the big mistake the philosopher makes is thinking that people have to be internally consistent. Why?
Which is not.
Yeah, I mean, philosophers do,
Yeah.
but nobody else, because most people.
I think
basically
Confucius was one of the ones that they expecting everybody to respect everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, because basically what people seem to do, I mean, most people, is they compartmentalize, right? They have this rule
in their
for
own unit.
no, they have this rule here and they have that rule there, and they have no difficulty with it. No difficulty whatsoever applying this rule here and another rule there. and they don't stop and think, but this doesn't make sense.
As
That is-
long as I don't mix the boxes together, that's fine.
Precisely. They're very happy to live like in separate boxes. And as long as everybody else is doing it. So they're happy to be habituated to do something which makes life easier and which is prescriptive. So I would say that the thing that the crowd holds in common in terms of laziness is laziness to think is the greatest laziness of all. In the sense that if you want anything what is the toughest sell is an idea, right?
Yeah.
A new idea is the toughest. Like if you want to sell something, it's you sell
Here we are
another
trying
version.
to sell ourselves.
Well, no, but you sell another version of the same thing, right? A slightly different version of the same thing, and then present it as new and give it like all kinds of bells and whistles. But at the end of the day, it's completely recognizable with a little twist, and that little twist is exaggerated to turn it into something that's like big news, right? Mm-hmm. So the cleverness of the marketing is to make the small into the big. But by and large, the capacity for a new idea is very, very limited. And I think one of the things is that it requires thinking, and thinking is tiring. It requires energy. And also, it's an energy, it's a muscle that has been now intentionally put to sleep over time.
Especially in last 100, 200 years.
Exactly. Is that we've got basically people who, even in their schooling, to a large extent, under the guise, like, for instance, you take a look at, the Rotman School there, and it talks about something in its logo, or, is about, domain of new ideas or something like that, right? You go in there, and it's basically locked up like a vault with locks everywhere, and you go in there, and you feel like you're in a penitentiary, right? Now, in that atmosphere, how could you possibly have new ideas, free thinking, in an environment that feels like a penitentiary? It's a complete contradiction in terms, right? So what we have now is that free thinking is almost like some kind of
A taboo.
or even a slogan. I mean, people say, "Oh, he's a free thinker." What does it mean? What does it mean? I mean, if we have
Actually, even they don't say that. They say, "Oh, what is it? He's out. He doesn't know anything. He's out of the. He's in the cave. He has been in the cave."
I remember watching a program once where a fellow was, talking about the fact that he had, all this data, and a voluminous amount of data and evidence, and he said this without a hint of irony. He said, and in all of that, not a single original idea, and he presented this triumphantly. Now, isn't that fascinating?
I remember years back when I was doing a lot of training in corporations or consulting. I was confronted with many of these entrepreneurs, and they immediately come to me and keep suggesting, "Oh, have you checked the Anthony Robbins? Have you checked that?" I said, "Yes, in early 90s when he was a hype, I just got the tapes and checked that, what he is saying. What do you think of it?" I said, "I didn't find anything new. There is only 2 or 3 basic rules he's talking about, which has been around from 4,000 years ago. You can find them in the school of the Buddhism. You can find them in the school of Hinduism. You can find it even in the philosophy of the Plato or Socrates or even Aristotle. So it is people, his basic rule is people go toward their pleasure and away from the pain,
which is
which has been around. Even Freud is reiterating from the
Ancients, yes.
2,000, 3,000 years. So, but as you said, delivery has become more important than content.
Completely.
And I had a show before our show about politics again, and the guest I had, he was pointing out that in the last, let's say, 50 or 60 years, our students in university are being indoctrinated rather than being educated.
Right. Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, like in school, what ends up happening? If you have an original idea, they'll say, "But what's your support? What's your evidence? How can you justify it, right? They're not interested in that. They're interested in you regurgitating existing theorems, combining them in new and different ways, and incrementally adding to them, but really almost adding to the complexity, right? Not necessarily adding eventually to clarity, because after a while, if you're just dealing with the same theories, right, and you've got more and more of these theses that have to come out, and everybody has to come up with a new one, right? Well, eventually you're going to have these ties will become more and more intricate and convoluted, until finally it's like a golf ball, like you're just a mess of these interconnections, which are really of what benefit to anybody? Nobody. But what they end up creating is a kind of
Convoluted.
a fog through which nobody can then, first of all, make any sense of this, and two, you can't refute it because it's too, it won't define itself, because it doesn't have an edge here or there. It's got this point and that point, but what about this and in this exception, right? So it doesn't. It's just this blob, and then if you try to have a new point, now you have to connect it to the blob, which of course, how can you connect anything that's clear and simple to the blob? Mm-hmm. They'll say, oh, that's too simplistic. How can you say that? Where's your foundation? Where's your evidence? Have you done a study? Blah, blah, blah. They'll have the same lines, right? And so in the end, you end up having to arbitrarily create these connections to prove the obvious.
Well, I was looking at
If you can at all.
I was looking at a couple of the videos regarding the nature, especially because there was some sort of the short exchange online about the life of the wolves. And I was looking at a couple of the very short videos. One of the things I noticed that they were talking about the chain of food among food chain about among animals. For instance, the wolves goes to the deer, deer goes to this, and go and go. And then they were discussing that as soon as you start to feed any one of these mankind, you interrupt that chain.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, and it brings back to this new idea with a different shape. As long as we are not really, you see, I think what you said is, if I'm gathering it right, or at least it is what I want to believe, that we as a humans have lost the ability of our critical thinking over centuries, and yet we improve our ability to be interfere on things that is already it's set and does its order.
Well, I think what we have is there's two different orders. There is, the natural order, and then there's the kind of artificial order, which I refer to as the game, which has its own order. It has its own logic, the game. But the thing then happens is that when the two meet, it's completely disruptive. You take a look at
Environment.
The environment, exactly. The moment
that is the best example.
The moment that we basically hit the environment, we just make a mess wherever we go. We just destroy, consume, destroy, consume, destroy. Without any kind of
and then we claim that we can fix it.
Well, the thing too is we can talk about it, but while we're talking about it, we're racing ahead and destroying it much faster and faster. So we're much better at destroying it than we are than fixing it. And I don't think we have any real intention of fixing it.
I don't think we have even the ability to do that, because I believe, again, personally, that, and I am pretty sure millions of people like me are there somewhere around the world, that they believe if you leave the environment alone, it replenishes itself as it has done for
it would.
Number of
because it's robust.
Now,
I think so too. Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you something that we didn't discuss that night, and that is
we're going off book.
No, it's not off book. I mean, you brought the issue of the environment, and I'm just connecting to my previous show
Right.
and the political correctness. And if you say something about, oh no, that is not, oh, you are, what is that, environmental denier, or whether, what is that? They have a phrase for
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
They give you any. I want to. That night, I was talking to you about how people treat each other during the day. So their triumph, I hustle him. I got more money that I wanted to from him or whatever.
Yeah.
And at the same evening, they're going to brag about it. I was talking. The issue that I want to discuss is the word insult.
Insult.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your thoughts before I start to blab
Well,
my mouth?
No, but I mean, in what? No, I mean you can start because in what context do you?
Because as soon as you disagree with someone or something, as soon as you say something, and they usually tend to, first they try to stifle you, then they try to tell you that you are denial, or you are
But I
left,
think
or you're right.
It depends on the society. Like I was
No,
speaking.
I think it's global.
No,
It's
no.
just different kind,
Well, no, but-
different subject matter.
No, there is a distinction between here and Europe, and I want to talk. I was talking with a young woman in France about this very thing the other day. And for instance, in France, and I would say this is true in Hungary or Serbia, when you're in a cafe
Okay.
and you're expressing views, the idea is to say something original, and I mean in a certain level of company. If you're in the intelligentsia,
You already start to talk
No,
Serbian.
No, no,
Okay.
but yeah, perhaps. Yeah, but the is you express a view and you have to then defend that view.
Okay.
So the idea is to extend yourself, say something original,
Show your conviction.
show your conviction and
passion,
show risk,
Yeah.
right? Show some originality and actually something that's interesting, right?
Okay.
And provoke, in a sense. There is a provocation that's expected because if you're not provoking, you're boring, and that, of course, is of no
You don't
interest
have
to
anything
anybody.
to offer on,
Exactly.
to the discussion.
So now
yes.
you provoke, but your provocation now has to be supported, right? And so then it
Not just go ranting.
exactly it plays from there. So that exchange then goes into a kind of playfulness, gameplay. You know, there's double entendre in it. There's irony. There's the degree to which it's serious or playful or it's nonsensical. But that is the kind of the core, the basic pattern upon which conversation is created. Now, that is not the case in Anglo-Saxon society. That's not the case in Britain. It's not the case in North America. I mean, I don't know Britain particularly, but I mean from what I've experienced in Britain, but certainly North America. Here, it is the Mutual Admiration Society, in which case you're basically supposed to be saying something which is absolutely agreeable to everybody in the crowd.
And if it's not,
And if it's not, then
then
essentially,
you are pigeonholed somewhere.
well, then you're essentially a pariah. In fact, your label is intense. It's great, that term, intense.
Yeah.
To describe someone as intense socially, let's just say in a good cocktail party, is more or less the kiss of death to be called intense. It's
so
worse than
by
boring.
intense, that means you are not welcome, you are not accepted, and get the hell out of my face.
Basically, you're a problem.
Okay.
You're discordant.
Now, again, good. That's good. Another good example. You are in a party. You are trying to discuss, and you become an intense
Yes.
or not welcome, and then you resist your path. You resist your point. You stand where you are.
You support your
on
point.
your support, and then you become insulting. That word is being used a lot.
Now, again, the interesting thing is that I think
You're insulting
when
me. You're
people-
insulting us, or something.
now, again, at a higher level of intellect, and we can call it breeding or whatever you want to call it, even though I will sound totally elitist in what I'm saying. There are certain rules of engagement in conversation. So you are talking about things on the idea level, and you stay on that level.
Okay.
Insult is essentially when the person who is not able to support their point adequately
Okay.
is the one who usually will descend to the insult. And what an insult really is when it becomes personalized,
Okay.
right?
Which in that example you just described, it happened because you become
Yeah.
intense.
Now, no, but if the no, it's nothing to do with intensity. It has to do with the fact that people basically now. Again, one of the problems is that we also have a society that is not trained in those rules of engagement. Most people, let's just say here, cannot hold.
More than 3 minutes of
Well,
conversation.
no, but they cannot hold a debate.
No, I mean 3 minutes of
That's
debate.
right. What ends up happening is that they will become personal very quickly because they can't hold it, and so they have to basically just to support themselves and to, as a kind of a faith-saving device, they'll become personal. Because they don't want to lose.
I have a theory. I don't know. I want to get your take.
And then they'll accuse the other person of being insulting, which is often the case too.
Yes. I want to get. I just explain what I think about this word insult in any language.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. I'm just thinking in English, and I want to have your take on it. I believe insult is when a person is being addressed or directed to his or her own insight. And let me give you an example. Let's say you and I are talking about something, not necessarily debating, we are talking about something. And I say something that is not pleasant to you. Either it's not true, or, I mean, there's two possibilities. Either it is what I'm saying is true, and it's not pleasant to you, or it's not true, and you don't like to be labeled as what I say.
And I feel that it's inaccurate. Yeah.
So in either case, you, not you personally, I'm using that
Yes,
as an
no, I
analogy.
understand.
You use the word, you're insulting me.
Right.
Okay. My belief is that if I am saying something that is not true, there is no reason to be even upset about it. If you tell me you are a thief and I am not a thief, why do I care? It is opinion of the one person. Let me go to that one, and then you give me your take.
Yeah.
And if it is true, then I am using that you're insulting me as a defensive mechanic to hide what I really am, which is transparent to you.
Oh, exactly. In either case, and I agree with you. When you're saying you're insulting me, usually it just means you don't have you don't have the ammunition with which, or the skills with which to counter what's being said. And so there's this kind of passive-aggressive kind of way of escaping the situation by saying, "Oh, you're insulting me," right?
Mm-hmm.
And once again, what it is, it's this soupy political correctness that does not value logic, right? Like if you take a look at the, I was just thinking about, once again, the green crowd, right? I mean, when you take a look at them, yes, there's a logic behind it and everything like that. But what's really driving it is this sort of touchy-feely thing of, we're saving furry animals, and we're saying nice things, and we're being positive, and we're being in a pleasant vibe, right? And it's all kumbaya, Birkenstock, and just mushy stuff, right? And I mean, they'll hate me for this, but the thing with this is that the moment that anybody attempts to make any point, of course, and this is the genius of it, right? Whoever
The genius of the game.
Yes, not of these fools who are actually playing it.
No.
They're just drones in it.
Genius of the structure of the game.
Yeah, because it's genius of the game. Because even the people who think they're against the game are actually serving the game. Because when you have individuals like this who are against the game, I mean, in other words, you couldn't have better enemies than this. Just like, for instance, these are the kind of individuals who did that sit-in in Wall Street, right? Now,
And the occupiers.
yeah, Occupy Wall Street. Now, I mean, what a wonderful
Display
group,
of the.
a group to have as your enemy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, basically, they come, sit down, and eventually, get tired, have to be fed, or God
And
knows
go.
what they have to do, and they go. This is the kind of enemy we should all wish for, right? It's great.
Yeah.
I mean,
It is
it's
entertaining.
win-win. Basically, everybody they have a good feeling because they had some really good times. They were self-organizing ad nauseum, and out of it came all kinds of new connections and probably new possibilities for similar, demonstrations.
They
And-
franchise it in
And
around
then,
the world.
again,
Yes,
even
okay.
franchise it, and
Yeah.
they carry on, and then they pretend that something happened. And in the meantime, business goes on as usual, so everybody comes away a winner.
And more profit for those who were the protest against.
Oh, of course. Everybody comes out, well, nobody went to jail. Look, I mean, come on, really, it's a win. It's a great win. Life carries on and everybody feels good. Because that's what really this is about.
It's just feeling good.
Oh, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't this what we have now? It's a bunch of people it's just like, these super, sort of fit, buff, good-looking people who are there demonstrating for animal rights or whatever they're, demonstrating for. You see them in Riverdale, just all Riverdale, on the Danforth is full of such individuals, right? And I was just thinking to myself, they're all looking good and they're all having these kind of, they've got this cloud of self-satisfaction of saying, it's like, it's good to be good.
So it is the attitude, bottom line.
That's right. As long as I'm good, you're good, we're good.
Then
we've got
why
the
I
complete
cannot have that
You?
personally?
Well, I mean,
I don't know about you, but I don't feel good most of the time.
first of all,
I don't feel bad, but I don't feel good. I don't feel.
First of all, you have to stop eating meat, get on an exercise bike for a while.
Oh.
you have to actually go at this. You can't just take a light approach.
just get up and feel good.
You have to actually take a studied approach to this.
But again, but it is contradictory because those I just saw a minute or two commercial the other night that a guy around the age of 50, very buff, coming in the kitchen and say, "Hey, I want to tell you that your metabolism after the age of 40 is different." Like we didn't know that, but I tell you how to do it. And get boxes of the fish and chicken and beef and all of that. And you're telling me to stop eating meat and start do exercise. Which one is it? To feel good. And the guy was feeling very good in the commercial.
Yeah, but internally he's suffering.
Yeah. Crying inside, laughing outside.
Yes, you could see that. That's right.
How
You have
you are
to,
doing, Chris?
you have to look deeper into that.
Yeah, I have to look at
He
deeper.
obviously had a keen sense of irony.
No, I don't know about the keen sense of irony, but what I'm saying is most of the time when I discuss to people, they are talking about love, about the happiness and all of that, and yet I don't see much of the evidence of that in the society.
No, but you're looking good. The key is, I just realized, what are the drones doing now? It's just, they figured out the best thing for drones to do where they have guaranteed results is they get them working out. Because actually, if you give them sort of
You
a
get
decent
all of
time-
your energy, so you don't have absolutely no
we
time
have
for
a
the
great-
thinking.
We have a great looking drone population. I mean, take a look at it. Because to end up looking that good, right?
It's like
Requires 2 to 3
it's
hours
like Hollywood.
of incredibly boring activity. Now, who can do that but a drone, right? Who is predisposed to that level?
and be proud of that.
Absolutely, because they're with each other, smiling at each other, I mean, just grinning like idiots at their machine, basically just sort of happily as they push up this
Maybe
way, that
those,
way.
if any one of those watching this program, they think.
And they look great, I must say, they do.
Probably they think these two
These idiots.
idiot because they cannot
Malcontents.
because they are not fit themselves. Now they are
Yeah,
criticizing
they
us.
they only wish that they could look like us. Which is somewhat true. Like, in other words, if I could do nothing and
Well,
look like them,
if-
I would certainly do it.
Listen, if I watch TV or some sort of the movie for a couple hours, maybe for a minute or two, I said it wouldn't be bad to be like that. But that,
As long
that
as
is
you didn't have to have everything else that went with it, and also be hanging around for those people, because then you have to go into a gym and be surrounded by such
and
people.
talk about the proteins and talking about
Oh,
what
for
you
instance.
get, how much weight you left, and all of that.
And talk about it with intensity. You know, exactly. And, you know, with absolute seriousness, and you have to actually park your sense of humor completely outside the door, because
Oh,
any
they
sort
have
of
sense
irony-
of humor.
Well,
One day I had.
that's a very liberal
Well,
definition of sense
since
of
you
humor.
brought that, I tell you, one quick.
What, humorous anecdotes about protein
Yes,
powder, or what?
No, it was about 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago. For some strange reason, I decided to do exercise for a very short period of time, maybe a month.
Thank God. You,
Yeah. I thought 1 month I can be in shape and become buff like them. Anyhow, but
how did that work for
I
you?
rented. Well, you can see the result. I was renting a apartment very close to George Berling College in Casaloma, and they had that gym
Yeah.
that certain hours in the early morning and certain hours in the late afternoon
For non-buff people to participate.
Student could go there.
Yeah.
So I went there, and a couple days, couple students, the phys ed or
Yeah.
what is that? Physical education.
Phys ed, yeah, physical
They
education.
start to tell me you breathe this way, you do a stretch this way, or something like that, and anyhow, there is what I notice in every gym. They have a big mirror on the wall.
Yeah.
For some reason, people they want
Well, no, you're supposed
to watch themselves.
Well, also, you watch your
Okay.
technique. You're supposed
But
to. But
what I
generally speaking, it's,
noticed, all of these buff guys, although they had the T-shirt like a jersey or something and a short, and they come every 5-10 minutes after they do a couple of the sets, they come and pull their jersey out and look at their six packs and try to contract them and looked at that.
Yeah.
So it started to a little bit bother me because it was
No, that's part of their training.
no, I understand, but they were doing it between the cycle and which is in my view.
Which means they were overtraining.
Oh, okay. So one day I went there with my belly. I just do that. I did like that.
How did they react?
And very seriously, I said, that's very good.
just
And I went. I
No,
don't
it's
know.
just right.
Too bad I didn't have camera to really take their reaction. That would be priceless.
Well, that is good.
Are we?
Yeah.
We are to the end of show. So you are departing on Wednesday, I
yeah,
believe.
Wednesday, and I'm back on the 3rd, and then we can continue.
Well,
then
if we
with
survive till
tales-
then, we will have another show then.
Exactly, if we're all alive.
I wish you the best of luck in your trip, and thank you for coming for this last show. Actually, it is our 30th show. You know?
Really?
Can you believe that?
That's
30th show.
that's a travesty.
Yes, that's true, of course. To those who don't like us.
Exactly. It's out of spite that we've existed this long.
So, folks, that was our show for the turnaround for this Monday, June 27th of 2016. I'm just thinking, did I say that at the beginning of program, voters or turnaround? I don't know. Maybe I mixed my shows together. Anyhow, please tune us when we become available after John is come back, and then it will be posted. The date will be posted on our website, turnarounddue.com. Please visit our website for previous shows, and have a good luck. Good night.